everyone, and welcome to Bagel Talk. We are going to be talking about all of the delicious
combos. Yummy.
Seriously, through all of the
I'm hallucinating right now.
All I see.
Are you ice cream?
So I'm Greg Tito, and I'm joined by Cleanse Master. What's your name?
Shelly.
Hi, Shelly.
Hi.
We also have an amazing guest here to talk to us about so many D&D things, Mr. James Giamato.
Yay!
Well, hello, heroes.
How are you?
For bringing me on this food-themed episode. I'm really honored to join.
I'm sorry that you have to be here for this day. It's just bad timing on your part.
I can tell you the next character that I play in a D&D game is going to be in the middle of like a fasting cleanse, and that's all they're going to talk about the entire adventure.
I kind of do feel like this is a good character right now.
Right?
Except it's real life. And it hurts. And it's not funny.
It's funny for everyone.
I'm going to eat this microphone.
It looks kind of delicious, right? In a gray, disgusting kind of way.
But seriously,
I think there are tons of things you can learn from real life that you can bring to Dungeons and Dragons.
Absolutely.
Right? So, James, you've been playing D&D for a long time, right?
I started playing D&D in college under 3.5.
That's where I learned too.
Yeah, I think
I learned.
Yeah, it was a fun edition to learn on, and now like comparing it to 5th in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that much work.
I know.
When I was playing before.
I would have been a lot better probably at D&D.
You think so?
If I learned on 5th edition.
Oh, just on 5th, right? But you're bringing 3.5 like sensibilities.
I mean, it just
in?
wasn't that good. It was hard.
Yeah.
It seemed like it took days to create a character.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Especially if you were creating one that had a prestige class, because then you got to make sure you had the skills that were necessary, all that stuff.
Well, and there are some things you never unlearn hopping from edition to edition, too. Like, I still ask people for will saves, and my players who learned on 5th look at me like I'm a madman, and I am.
As it turns out.
Yeah.
I've called for a spot check here or there.
Oh, yeah.
For that reason, or a listen check, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've been playing for a good, over a decade now, for sure.
And you're based in the Chicago area.
That's true. I am in the wonderful role-playing capital of Chicago. We have a lot of people like on the indie scene out here in Chicago, but it is a wonderful group of people that you can always find good games with.
That's awesome. It wasn't always the RPG capital. I guess proximity to Wisconsin means you're always going to be a little bit more in touch with old school RPGs, but I never really thought of Chicago as that center.
Well, it really became that, I want to say, in the last 5 to 10 years. And that's because there's a wonderful group out here called CAGWIC, which is the Chicago Area Game Writers Colloquium, which is a bunch of game designers in the Chicago area, meet up once a month, grab drinks together and hang out. And that community has slowly been growing over time. And we've also got tons of people into the actual play scene out here too. I would still say as far as game design central, you've definitely got West Coast places that are probably locking down both of those fields, but there are a lot of people in Chicago.
Yeah. And it dovetails really nicely with the improv comedy scene there as well.
Yes. Well, improvisers are very good role players. Even those who have never tried it before. I am an improviser who says that role-playing and improv are not different. They are the same thing. Role-playing systems, I believe, are just very robust, improv forms. So they have a lot more specific rules and different conditions, but at the end of the day, it's still spontaneous storytelling. It's still playing pretend. And the context is just slightly different.
Yeah, and I never even thought of it too, but one of the major, improv comedy organizations out there or whatever used to be called the Improv Olympics, right?
Oh, yes. Well, Improv Olympic is still out here. It is called IO now because of a lawsuit. The Olympic Committee.
They can't call them Olympics
do
anymore.
Not like you
Not
using
call them
the word.
Olympics.
Still.
They are extremely litigious, which I find to be very funny. But yeah, so IO was founded out here. Second City was founded out here. Modern improv as a discipline was actually created in Chicago.
Right. And there's that idea that it was a game, though. That you're playing a theater game. And that you could, potentially, not necessarily win, but like that you're participating in something that had, rules, but it has, a play associated with it. And when I was coming up in the world of comedy, I never really thought of gaming and improv and comedy as different muscles of the same thing. But, the nomenclature is all right there. Like, it was already thought of as that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like you're 100% right that improv as an art form was derived from theater games.
Yeah.
And today, we have the good fortune of the context around everything being changed. Like you can take a role-playing game and you can record it or you can stream it and export it as a performance, which is something that even 10 years ago would have been a ludicrous idea.
Totally.
It was here even.
Yes.
I remember Chris Perkins has gone on record as saying that he thought no one would listen to anyone playing a game.
Yep. Or let alone watch people playing.
Right.
Like, why would you do that?
I know.
When you could just be playing your own game.
And now we've got hundreds of thousands of people doing that
Yep.
every day.
Every day.
And of which you are a large amount of that content that's being created is coming not just from you, but from the studio that you control.
Absolutely. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of the One Shot Podcast Network, and we produce actual play games, like on stream and podcasts primarily. One Shot has been around now for about 5 years, and we've done a lot of really cool like D&D related content. We have the Dungeon Dome, which is our I know there's another actual play service that's like trying to mash up esports and D&D. Our idea was let's take professional wrestling and put it together with D&D.
Yeah.
So we fight out fantasy battles in an arena, and we usually use D&D for that one. And we also produce Rivals of Waterdeep gets produced out of our studio as well. And then, of course, The Broadswords is part of our network. So if you like D&D podcasts, we've got a lot.
That's right.
So that's interesting. 5 years ago. So you just saw an opportunity. You were like, oh my God, people really are watching this stuff. And then you just jumped on it. You just started a whole network around it, sounds like.
So I had been podcasting for about a year before then, just doing general comedy podcasts. And I was part of a small network called Peaches and Hot Sauce. And my boss at the time, great. It's a great name. It totally explains exactly what the network does. My boss at the time came to me and said he had been listening to actual play podcasts. And he's like, I know that you play role-playing games. Can you do something like this for us? And I took a look around, and I will say I dearly love D&D, but I noticed that D&D was pretty much the only thing people were doing podcasts or streams about.
Mm-hmm.
And One Shot is sort of built on the foundation of let's try lots of different things, because there's a huge medley of games out there, thousands upon thousands of different systems. And so One Shot, we explore everything, and that includes D&D. And the network has grown from there because people really took and ran with that concept, and it built up to the point where now we produce a couple different programs that are solely based in D&D, in addition to our let's try everything out sort of approach.
I love that idea of especially playing other games that are in the same space as Dungeons and Dragons, because there's a lot out there, and so.
And it changes your perspective for games. After playing a few different games, I came back to D&D, and I found I enjoyed it more and in different ways because I had the perspective from playing those other games.
Right. It's the same as, when I was a kid, I would read fantasy novels pretty much exclusively, even to I always, read most of the books I was assigned in English classes. But when I graduated from school and was on my own and could make all the reading decisions that I needed to make, I would often make sure I was having other non-fantasy books in my rotation, mostly for that reason that you're describing, where like it made the fantasy ones that much better or more brought to the forefront. But then I also learned a lot from the more contemporary, more things that wasn't in my wheelhouse.
Absolutely. Like I mean, you can see with the Dungeon Dome, but like these days when I return to fantasy gaming and Dungeons and Dragons specifically, I'm layering different genres into it. Like if I have one shots that I run at conventions that are like noir mysteries, and I've got things that I do with the Dungeon Dome. Obviously, it's about pro wrestling. It's sports drama and whatnot. So I learned all of that and how to approach all of that by like through other role-playing games, and just sort of brought it back to my home games at D&D, and I've found a lot of fun with it.
I dig it.
So how are you finding content for the One Shot Network? Are people coming to you and pitching you a show idea, or do you guys see like there seems to be a void in this area and let's try to find something to fill it?
So for us, we do get a few pitches. Most shows that come to us through pitches don't get picked up. Like usually what we try to do when we add a new show to our network is we've got a core like mission statement at our network, and that is to, one, make role-playing games more approachable and enjoyable for everyone. So the idea being like, there are a lot of people who are like, I don't know, D&D's for me, and they feel that way until they see someone or hear someone play it, right? So that is like, well, we produce these shows, we produce these entertainment pieces to make the idea of playing a role-playing game something that's people can grok easier, make it something that people feel they can understand easier. Mm-hmm. And the second ethos is make sure that the role-playing community itself is a welcoming and inclusive community. And a lot of how we have decided to do that is through representation. We are trying to use our platform, use the company that we have to create shows that show off a diverse set of players and people in our community. So folks outside can look at it and go, oh, look, there are all these wonderful people playing these games. I should probably be a part of that too. It looks like it's a lot of fun. So like the newest shows that we've added Session Zero recently, which is a show that examines role-playing through the lens of psychology. It's got 2 licensed psychologists who talk about role-playing games and like the psychological impact of these games and how they can be super helpful, and different ideas that appear in psychology that you can use to sort of deconstruct your own experiences.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. That actually premieres on Tuesday. I'm super excited about that one.
Oh, I was just gonna say I haven't seen any episodes for that yet. So yeah, good. I'm glad I wasn't just missing it. It's coming out soon.
Oh, and then the one that came out just before that was Asians Represent, which is run by Daniel Kwan and Agatha Chen, who just sort of look at the impact of Asian American and other Asian national designers on the role-playing industry itself, mm-hmm. and also sort of take a critical look at uses of Asian culture and ideas that have appeared in role-playing, over the past couple decades. And we look at, well, where was the industry successful in incorporating this, and where could it be doing better? And of course, they get to interview all sorts of fascinating Asian folks from all over about their role-playing projects. It's a super cool show because like they've only had 3 episodes so far, and I feel like I have learned like so much just from listening to those 3 so far. So that's usually like how we find our shows is I listen to people's ideas, or I find people that like I kind of like in the community and go, you've got a really unique voice. Is there a show that you would like to do? And how can we make that happen for you?
That is amazing.
I dig it. I want to go listen to both those shows right now.
I do too.
That's one of my best parts about consuming podcasts is that I am constantly being like, hey, I just learned this thing, so I'm going to go, find out more about it or go try it out. I listened to one about yogurt recently, and I'm like, I don't eat enough yogurt.
Podcast about yogurt?
It was a short one. It was not like this was actually really a long form thing about yogurt.
Want to listen to a podcast about yogurt?
Well, what do you know about yogurt?
It's so good.
It's so creamy and delicious. Did we mention that
the
Shelly
little granola on
is
top.
on a cleanse? So
We
I didn't
mentioned
realize
that Shelly hasn't eaten food in like 13 hours.
But yogurt is really fascinating because it is it's one of the first kind of manufactured foods that we don't even know when it really was invented. It's been around for so long, and they think in some ways it contributed to civilization growing because you needed to have
Healthy guts.
well, things in place in order to make, to manufacture yogurt. And they think, beer is one of those things as well. So maybe they were hand in hand. So it's super fascinating. And that's what the podcast form is so great at, because you can have experts talk about something that is, fascinating to some, mostly like us. Like, we're the experts here.
Uh-oh.
Wait, no.
That's not true.
yeah.
None of that
That's
is true.
That's not true.
That's why we bring on the experts, so that we can
Right.
ask you all the fun things.
Yeah.
So in all of the podcasts, all the live play podcasts, people are always trying to come up with new and interesting characters to play, and that's fascinating that we have been, in this proliferation of D&D content that's coming out there, and very rarely do I find someone who's like, oh, I'm just playing a fighter, a straight up tropey fighter. Like, everyone has still been able to come up with extremely unique backstories for their characters.
Absolutely. And I, this year, developed a guide to sort of help people make even more robust characters. One of the things that people always say when they come to us, if they listen to any of our shows, regardless of the game system those shows are based on, they go, man, it's so entertaining watching you guys. I wish that I could do that at my group at home. And, we always say, well, you absolutely can. But I noticed that there are certain things that role-playing core books are really good at preparing people to do. They will guide you through the process of mechanically making a character. But once you get to the table, there's only sort of soft support for certain experiences. So with the Ultimate RPG Character Backstory Guide, I came up with over 100 activities that sort of guide people through the process of creating a dramatically and narratively interesting character. And it can be applied to a character that you're already playing now, or, characters that you plan to create in the future. And essentially giving you the ability to give your characters different story hooks so that they can have the narrative satisfaction that you get when you watch something like a one-shot program or Critical Role.
That's interesting.
Okay, so what is this
Yeah.
based off of? Is this based on your improv background or what? Or just
So
years
a collection
playing?
of different things. This is definitely based on my background as an improviser. When you do improv, especially long form improv in Chicago, the goal when you're creating a character is to very instantly create a character that is deeply appealing to an audience. And someone that feels like when you are looking at that character on stage, you're looking at a very interesting moment in the life of someone who will exist after that scene ends. So you want to create someone that feels real, someone that feels interesting with their own thoughts and motivations and dreams and passions and whatnot. So we've developed a bunch of different techniques in order to help us as performers do that very, very quickly so that we can get on stage, make that character interesting right away so that we can get into the scene and entertain everybody so we have a good time. So a lot of the ideas in the book are built on that. But the rest of it, I think, comes from just a long career of, I've played professionally for one shot. I've played over 100 different role-playing games, and goodness knows how many more I've read. I wouldn't be able to tell you. But especially in narrative games, there are certain mechanics that orient themselves towards developing character, character motivation and pathos that I sort of applied to okay, well, let's strip these away from the systems they came from and use those mechanics to help people do that sort of storytelling just on their own.
So when you say activities at the table, what does that mean exactly?
So this would be something actually that is designed primarily to be away from the table. You definitely can take a couple of these activities. They're like mini games or such that you could take and layer onto your own game. But I am someone with a lot of friends who tell me that often the most joy they get out of a role-playing game, the most fun they have with D&D, is when they're creating a character privately at home with themselves. And by the time they bring it to the table, they're already on to the next one. And like that's been a part of the game for years. And I would argue if you take 2 hours to create a fighter, and then you spend 4 hours later that week playing that fighter at the table, that you've spent 6 hours total playing Dungeons and Dragons because you were playing, you were enjoying yourself that whole time when you were building up that character. So the activities in this book, like one of them would be 5 fears. It's something that I created for beginning characters, new characters that you take into the game, where you give that character 5 different fears that they have, like moving into the story. That way you're starting out with an imperfect character who has fears that they will hopefully confront and conquer through your adventures in the game. And the questions are very directed prompts to help you as a player think through, okay, well, what does my character think about, or what do they fear about other people? What do they feel nervous about? What do they have anxiety about? Are they a really good public speaker, but not really good one-on-one, that sort of thing? That exercise would help you build up a more complex character, one who is not just straightforward and the only thing that you know about them is their skill scores.
Yeah. All right, cool. That sounds...
Are you meant to share this with your dungeon master, or is this just for the player to keep to themselves?
So you can do both. I highly encourage people like share things with their dungeon master, but it's also for the subset of people who, like, I know when I first started playing D&D, I would walk away from the table and I would just feel agony for the next week because I was waiting for the next opportunity to play. And, you know, you think about like your character in those moments in between and situations that you want them to get into and what they would say in those various situations. So I built the book to sort of extend the process of play to those moments too, those moments in between the game where you can really think about your character. And even to help you hook into the story that you're being told more. One of the exercises that's like kind of a mini game challenges you to video game achievement style discover things about the game world that your dungeon master has created. So it will give you a list of things. It's like, okay, find out these things. Find out who has the strongest military force in this setting and how that military force works. So you at the table are playing through the regular story, but in those downtime moments where your GM asks you, so you're at the tavern, do you ask anybody about anything? You'll be queued up with an answer like, oh yeah, I would like to learn a little bit more about the world's military. And that way you can pull yourself deeper into your GM's world and figure out how that relates to your character.
That's interesting.
I really like that too.
I do too.
How do you? I mean, so I guess that's like if you had like an achievement sheet or something like that, you could just kind of cross it off and be like, all right, I did that. And it's not even necessarily. That's the funny thing about achievements in the video game world too, is like no one ever actually knows that you've gotten an achievement most of the time.
Exactly. It's just for you.
It's just for you. So this is like extending that to your RPG world, and you're like, all right, well now I know what the most important military is and how it's used, and I got that achievement.
I like that too, because a lot of times, myself included, people don't know, like if you're in a tavern and there's this patron that's willing to talk to you, like I don't always know what to ask that person.
Yeah.
That kind of gives you something, and then like thus helps you with role playing, because a lot of what people, their barrier for role-playing games is the role-playing part, because they're scared because they don't know how to role-play, or do I have to use a voice? Do I have to make up funny words and actions?
And that's one of the wild things about improv, right? Improv and role-playing, one of the things that people who come to it new struggle with most is they have unlimited options before them. You can do so much in this game that it's hard to know exactly what you want to do.
Right.
So a lot of these activities and mini games are breaking down your motivations to smaller, more understandable pieces that you can carry with you throughout the game. There's one exercise that challenges you to learn things about the other characters at the table and learn those things in character. So you are given a bunch of like personality questions about, you know, who they are, what they want out of life and whatnot, and how you can help them with that. And that way, like when you are sitting at the campfire around a watch or something, you can get closer to the other characters and learn more about them, so that you become invested in the stories of everybody else at the table along with your own character. That's because I've just found in games where I feel like I know about my party and I know about all the things that the other people in my party want to do, I feel so much more invested in everything that's going on, because it's not just my story, it's everybody's story and we're all telling it together.
Yeah. And it's almost like a lot of these activities you're talking about and that are in this book, which sounds fantastic, by the way, but it feels like you're pulling out a lot of the bonds and values and flaws system that's in, you know, that's baked into 5th edition, but expanding that whole idea, because that's one of my favorite parts about 5th edition is that it puts those front and center on the character sheet for players to think about, when in previous editions it was just kind of like an afterthought, and now we're putting it front and center, but you're almost like blowing up that system and making it, you know, more robust.
Absolutely. Like I really appreciate those being incorporated into the new D&D. It's one of the most exciting developments that came out of the new edition, because it showed that the experience that I was having with my 3.5 games that didn't feel super mechanically supported, but I always enjoyed, like playing a character who had flaws and drawbacks to them, to be more interesting for me as like a storyteller. That's something that Wizards noticed and were like, okay, well, how do we make this part of the game? Mm-hmm. And, you know, just like there are folks who will, you know, buy the splat books for D&D in order to get more robust mechanics, you know, surrounding, gosh, I guess they're not as dry as this anymore. They're a lot more driven. But like I know in old D&D, I think it was like in 3.5, I think it was like Complete Warrior or something like that, had rules for military engagements and how you would stat out battles that were being fought by large armies, mm-hmm. so that could affect your story. Yeah. I took that same ethos of, okay, if Dungeons and Dragons makes a splat book that is about the mechanical end of a large army combat, how do I make a splat book that is the mechanical end of good storytelling? Yeah. And how you can have a more realized character at the table.
Man, now I want all those splat books.
I know. It's inspiring, because going back to what you said about how the players can find out information about the other players and sitting around the campfires, because a lot of times in a game, that's the part of the story that we just gloss over. It's like, and we take a long rest. Okay. Oh, we wake up the next day and we're all refreshed and ready to go. But you actually could take those moments of sitting around the campfire and actually expand upon them and use that for really good storytelling, which I never really thought about doing.
My first game master was a very by the books DM. He would use every splat book he could and incorporate almost every imaginable role into the game, which sometimes made the game very slow. But one thing he did that I really appreciated is he would have us go on watches at night for random encounters. So we would be sitting there and he would be like, okay, who's assigned to each watch? And we would have to do things like make sure the spellcasters went on the first or the last watch.
So they could have their full 8 hours
refreshed and all that nonsense. So like we go on these watches, but it would be moments where our characters would sit down together and it would just be two characters on the watch, because like you can't bear the risk of only one person being on a watch and missing a spot roll and then getting murdered by some random beast. So they would be these moments, and he would give us the opportunity to, before he asked for our perception checks, to just sit and talk to each other. And we'd sort of debrief about the adventures that we just had, and we'd talk about, what our characters want in the future. And those became some of my favorite moments of the game, where I was almost more interested in what my character's emotional debrief about the fight that we just had would be than I was more than necessarily about like the fight where I blew up everybody with a cool fireball.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I kind of wanted to capture for other people. And because that happened like spontaneously and it happened in an unplanned way, I felt like if you had just, as a new player, sat me at the table and told me to do that, I would have no idea what you were talking about or what I should do.
Right.
So I wanted to make that easier.
Yeah. Is the book meant also for some things for dungeon masters or game masters to use to help their players as well?
Absolutely. There's a lot of world building stuff in this as well. One exercise that I've come to really love, I've played through it a couple times with my friends, is called Damn Merlinials, and is a story world building exercise where everybody at the table gets together and crafts a generational conflict between an older generation of adventurers and a younger generation of adventurers. And you sort of define like, okay, what pieces of technology do that these younger adventurers have access to that the older ones didn't? Or what conflict did the older generation come against that the younger one doesn't have a sense of? And you just sort of create like, well, this is how our experience running around going through dungeons is different than the experience of people 20 years ago. And this is how these personalities clash. So it's an opportunity for the players themselves to inject a little bit of their personality and perspective into the world. And for the game master or dungeon master, I suppose, to look at all those options and go, okay, how can I pick up on this in my game? Next time you are going into a tavern, the bouncer at the door can be like a half-orc who is from this older generation of adventurers, and he's leering at you because he, resents all of the things that you have as a young person.
And he calls you a Merlennial.
Yeah.
Damn Merlennial.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good term right
Yeah.
there. I want to start using that wherever I can. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that a lot of new players don't realize is that that connective tissue, those relationships between your characters and the NPCs that the Dungeon Master controls, that's the game. That's the most exciting and interesting and probably the most memorable part of the game. It's not going to necessarily be you swung your sword and you killed the goblin, although, there's plenty of those moments that people like to talk about those as well, those heroic moments. But, that idea of, you even think about it like an episode of an hour-long drama on TV, right? Like the lion's share of that episode is conversation about motivation and what you're going to do. There might be 5 minutes of action in that episode. And the same is true for a D&D session where like a lot of it is relationships and how they work. And that's what the game is really modeling. Of course, there is, the rolling and the fun and the crazy action that you can do. But, I love that you're encouraging more of those quiet moments.
Absolutely. I mean, D&D does a fantastic job of creating super interesting stakes for people, right? Like one of the reasons that it's such an enduring like type of role playing and that D&D is the big top brand is that the circumstances that you encounter in a Dungeons and Dragons game are immediately interesting. Like you're looking for wealth, you're fighting life and death battles, and that's all awesome. So that's taking care of a huge part of what people, when they're writing novels or screenplays, are trying to address. But the real meat that's swirling around all those stakes is how it's affecting the characters.
Yeah.
Like it makes a huge difference if you roll 5 damage and that, that kills a big bad NPC who's been chasing you over the course of the game, or if you roll 10 damage and killed some random goblin. You're going to care a lot more about that lower 5 damage roll because there's a huge amount of emotional and story importance built into it. So this book is like sort of trying to break down that aspect of play and how that can enhance all of the stuff that D&D already does super great.
Yeah, and I think even it shows the transition of early Dungeons and Dragons rules to now very well, in that, you know, the way modules were written in the 80s, it was very much like, here's the monsters, here's the treasure. You know, there's very little motivation for why you need that stuff other than to advance your character. But like, you contrast that with Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and there's treasure, as the plot. But that's most of that book has to do with this character wants that, and these characters want these, and these villains have these motivations, but they're actually trying to do it because of this reason, and not because it's all about literally what you're talking about describing in this book. That's what Dungeons and Dragons has morphed into in its adventure writing, and so it seems like we're all reaching the same conclusion. And gosh, I want almost more of these things baked into the manuals as a whole.
Yeah, I would love to see what like a splat book that is based on narrative storytelling would be coming out of D&D. That would be super cool. But like, I'm already super impressed by. I remember way back when I was talking to a much older role player who at the time had been role playing for like 20 years, which, I was only a couple of years in, so I couldn't fathom that. And he told me that he and his group would replay the same old like 2nd edition modules. Whoa. They would play through the module and then they would play it again. And like, not with a different DM or anything like that. They would just play the game again.
The same characters even?
Yeah. But like something like Dragon Heist these days, where you have potentially different antagonists that you could be playing with and something like that, I can now see, oh yeah, I would definitely want to play Dragon Heist like 2 or 3 times just so I could experience how the game changes based on all of that. So I think like it's something that we've kind of always wanted to see. And one of the really exciting things about being a role player these days is that, people are making it.
Yeah, it's true. So, all right. So this book is called The Ultimate RPG Character Backstory Guide. Mm-hmm. After hearing what is in this book from you, that sounds pretty amazing.
I'm sold.
Yeah.
It's available. It's out now, right?
Yeah, it's out now. It's available anywhere books are sold. You should be able to find it in brick and mortars. You could find it in a Barnes & Noble. It's available from any imaginable online seller. Just search that, or I know it is a very long title. You could also search for James D'Amato, and it'll come up that way too.
Good thing you haven't been so prolific.
Not yet. I already can sense there's a volume 2 of this one.
That's right. All the stuff that got cut out.
100 more ways. I
mean, as long as my publisher keeps paying me to do it, I'll come up with whatever.
Sweet. One idea that I've always thought that people who are not from the improv comedy world, I think would benefit from is doing improv warm-ups in character before a session.
Whoa.
It's funny you should mention that. I did not write this book, but there is a book written by Karen Twelves that is just about role-playing or improv warm-ups and exercises that you can do to help your role-playing.
Oh, nice.
So I highly recommend checking that book out. It rules.
That sounds right in my alley, because as you're describing it, I'm like,
what would you do? What would be some good warm-ups?
Gosh, I don't know. I'm not an improver. I wish I was a better improviser. I need that book.
I need it too.
To find out what to do.
I need it by Wednesday.
Right? Because a lot of the people that we play with don't necessarily come from that background. Obviously, in Chicago, you guys have that wealth of improvisers there to come from, but that's not true everywhere in the country or in the world, right? So having a little bit of prompts, and even for the dungeon master, themselves. I mean, I was, caught up with being that kind of dungeon master that needed to over prepare and have the answer for everything. And it was this wonderfully freeing moment where I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to make it up, whatever makes sense at the time. And, that was really freeing. But, it takes exercising that muscle to trust it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you got to let yourself like fall down and fail sometimes too,
Yeah.
which is difficult. When I think of my first experiences as a game master compared to what I do these days, it's way different. So just trying and doing things.
What do you do when the party wants to go left, and you've only prepped for right?
I go left with them as hard as I possibly can. I very recently ran a game.
Oh wait, that's the secret. Go left so hard that you're actually going right.
You just spin them right around.
I recently ran a game for some players where the prepared like module adventure was supposed to be you are going to rob a king's fortune. You're just going to steal the gold from this king. And it had them like starting out at a union meeting for their like they were like all farmers, and they were meeting at this farmers union, and they were a lot more interested in just like causing trouble at this union meeting than like actually going out and getting gold at any point. So I was just like, okay, if that's what the story is, if it's union rules and whatnot, somebody at this meeting chokes and dies, and like because of logistical red tape, you now owe an obscene amount of money to this like the state and this person's family, and we're going to follow that for a little bit. And they ended up having a fantastic time. It was nowhere near the adventure that they were supposed to go on, but it doesn't matter. You just lean into it.
I like it.
I need a do-over.
Yeah, you do need a do-over. Shelly needs to get back in the dungeon mastering game.
You absolutely do.
I don't know. It's so scary.
You know what you should do? You should do a cleanse leading up to it. And so you're already going to be like
D&D fast.
You're going to be basically high from the fumes that are in your stomach.
I feel like if I were to DM right now,
yeah,
I would kill everybody.
Yeah, see, that's a
Just
good
a cheapie.
That's a good instinct to have.
And then I would eat their snacks. Give me your rations.
Yeah, we're going to be doing a potluck style D&D session. So you bring a dish, and afterwards we'll just eat. Oh, it looks like rocks fall and the whole party's dead, but here's all this food.
Deal.
All for me.
Deal and deal.
That sounds
Excellent.
amazing.
Well, James, how can people find out more about this book if they have any great backstory ideas and more about what you're doing in general?
So like I said, you can look up on the book anywhere books are sold. Just search for the Ultimate RPG Character Backstory Guide or James D'Amato. If you want to talk to me, you can find me on Twitter at OneShotRPG. And you can find all the rest of my work over at oneshotpodcast.com. That has all of the wonderful shows that we have on the One Shot Podcast Network, including my show, One Shot, where every week we have a new episode, and just about every month or so, we switch to a new role-playing system with a new cast of players. So if you love D&D and you want to know more about what's out there in the world of role-playing, but you don't have the time to play things that are not D&D, I totally have you covered. And you can listen to those games and get the benefit of those.
Awesome. Thank you so much for calling in and chatting with us.
I feel inspired.
I do too.
I really do.
I'm going to create a really robust character backstory now that'll have your guide in hand.
Well, awesome. I can't wait to hear about them.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks a lot, James.
Thank you.
Say hi to everyone in Chicago.
Everyone.
Especially
literally
Tanya
everyone.
And everybody from the Rivals of Waterdeep. They're doing awesome
absolutely
stuff.
I will.
Okay, good.
All right.
See you later.
Bye.
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 Oh, my gosh.
I want to create more characters.
More
now.
characters.
Yes.
I feel like we have too many. Too much character.
We probably do.
Too much character coming out of my eyeballs.
Yep. You
Is
do.
that true?
I've always said that about you. Greg Tito. Too much character.
Coming out of his sweater glands.
Too many good sweaters. Too much character.
You're just like still thinking food, hot dogs and hamburgers.
Your ampersands look like hot tamales.
Like the cinnamon candies that are in Nathan's
were in my
office right now.
candy bag
Nathan
that I
has
made.
them in his office right now.
He has hot tamales in his office?
Yeah.
Why is there food everywhere? Why have I never noticed how much food there is?
This food here is delicious.
What are you drinking?
It's delicious.
Is it a smoothie?
It's a yogurt smoothie. Thank you, guys. We are going to take a short break and come back with, oh gosh, I hadn't really talked to Chris Perkins about what we're going to be talking about for lore. So I don't know what the topics are going to be, but they are going to be interesting.
Something you should know.
All right. Shelly's going to take a little break.
but not eat.
I guess you're done actually, because we won't be live streaming our intros and outros.
Oh yeah, I guess that's it for me.
All
You
right.
probably won't ever see me again.
Maybe not in 2019 again, or sorry, 2018. You won't
Not-
see you
not
until
next week?
2019. I don't think we got anything on the schedule. Oh wait, or do we?
I don't know.
I don't think we do. Yeah. Well, we're getting all of our
Well,
recordings
Happy New
in
Year,
right now.
everyone.
But yeah, we'll let you know for reals.
Okay.
But I think this might be the last session we're recording. Session. I don't know. I say that now, and we probably have something
We'll
else
find
coming
something.
up. But we'll there's always more to talk about. But in any case, we'll be back in a couple minutes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.